Welcome to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we're plunging into some really fascinating material. It's a transcribed spiritual lecture.
Right. It's called Palestra 290-42025. A real historia do Papa João Paulo II que viru espírita após a morte. Comes from the YouTube channel GFE Irmão Bezerra de Menezes.
And it gives us this, well, unique vantage point, doesn't it? Looking at history, even cosmic stuff, through a very specific spiritual lens.
Exactly. It's not your typical history lesson.
No, definitely not. So our mission today in this deep dive is to really unpack the most, let's say, intriguing claims from this lecture.
We'll be navigating its story about Jesus' involvement with Earth, which
Yeah.
is pretty extensive according to
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
And its take on Christian history, plus spiritual ideas like, reincarnation, talking with spirits.
connects things you wouldn't normally expect.
Totally. Prepare yourself, because you're going to hear connections drawn between ancient civilizations, biblical stories, the Catholic Church, Spiritism. It might just reshape how you think about some of this stuff.
Okay, so where does it begin? The lecture kicks off with a huge claim, really. Jesus as the Lord of the Stars.
Yeah, and Governor of Earth. Involves right from the start, like 4.5 billion years ago.
It's an immense scope, far beyond the usual understanding of Jesus.
It really is. Puts him right at the heart of Earth's origin story. And it goes on talking about interactions with, like, Lemuria and Atlantis.
Legendary civilizations.
Right. And there's this specific claim about Atlantis, a warning, apparently 100 years before it sank,
A warning. What about?
about the arrival of inferior, more primitive spirits, which the lecture kind of implies.
Okay.
Well, that's us.
Wow, okay. So our arrival triggered the downfall. That's quite a perspective. It suggests spiritual evolution is key to a civilization's fate.
Yeah, it seems to be saying that divine oversight is based on, like, spiritual progress, or
Well,
lack thereof.
Which contrasts sharply with just looking at, economics or politics for why civilizations fall.
Exactly. And the lecture paints Atlantis as super advanced technologically.
Right, I saw that. Cures for cancer, even.
And this powerful energy source, Rio.
Rio?
Yeah.
Powered by a giant crystal pyramid.
Yeah, 400 meters across, supposedly in the Bermuda Triangle.
Yeah.
Protected by 7 keys, whatever that means.
That's incredibly specific. You hear about advanced Atlantis tech in other places, but this pyramid, the location, it's very detailed.
But it wasn't just about the tech. The lecture says misuse of this Rio led to the first murder in Atlantis in thousands of years.
Ah, so a moral failing.
Seems like it. And that prompted Jesus, according to the source, to decide their path just wasn't sustainable.
So advanced tech isn't enough if the ethics aren't there. Makes sense, in a way.
Which brings us to crystals. The lecture really emphasizes them.
Says they're superior to silicon for storage, energy.
Yeah, based on info from a dragon named Lennar.
Okay, hold on. A dragon? Lennar.
That's what it says. Apparently, Lennar is a source of spiritual knowledge, maybe a channeled entity.
Huh. So Lennar says crystals are better conductors, spiritually speaking, and diamonds are just a byproduct.
A byproduct of crystal transformation over billions of years. That's the idea presented.
Okay, so let's shift back to Jesus himself. The lecture makes another big claim here.
The incarnation one.
Yeah, that he only incarnated on Earth once, not multiple times like some churches teach.
That definitely challenges mainstream Christian belief.
And it ties into this idea of spiritual evolution across different planets. You have to reincarnate elsewhere to eventually become a Christ.
So being a Christ is like a stage of spiritual development achieved through many lives, many worlds.
That seems to be the framework here. It offers a different reason for Jesus's uniqueness.
And it links to the idea of primitive planets.
Right, like schools for spirits who didn't quite pass Earth's tests.
The tests.
Yeah.
So our life here is about spiritual growth, lessons to learn.
And maybe Christ guides some of those other worlds, too. Earth itself is apparently moving up, from primitive to regeneration, eventually celestial.
So there's a cosmic purpose to all this. Planetary evolution tied to our spiritual progress.
Yeah, a trajectory for the whole planet and everyone on it.
Which leads to a criticism in the lecture, doesn't it? About churches waiting for Jesus to physically come back.
It calls that a misunderstanding of spiritist doctrine. The emphasis is more on ongoing spiritual connection, not a single physical return.
So what was the point of Jesus' visit, according to this lecture?
2 main things. Teaching love, obviously, but also the communicability of spirits.
Ah, spirit communication. And Pentecost is used as an example.
Exactly, presented as historical proof of this communication, even though, many churches today aren't keen on it.
Interpreting Pentecost as direct spirit contact is pretty central to Spiritism, isn't it?
Absolutely. And then there's the idea about miracles.
Oh, right. The claim that they don't really exist
Yeah.
because God follows natural laws.
Yeah. Instead, things we might call miracles are explained through karma, cause and effect across lifetimes.
It brings a sort of rational element into the spiritual framework.
There's that anecdote used to illustrate it.
Yeah.
About Chico Xavier.
The famous Brazilian medium.
Right. And a child born without arms. The lecture connects that condition directly to past life actions.
And even the later amputation of the child's legs. That was framed as a spiritual intervention.
To prevent a suicide the child was planning, apparently involving a train. It's a very stark example linking karma, current life, and spiritual guidance.
Definitely makes you think about cause and effect in a different way. Okay, let's look at the Bible interpretations. John 16:12.
I have many things still to say to you, but you cannot bear them now. The lecture sees this as Jesus basically saying, more revelations are coming later.
A hint of future truths. Makes sense. And then the other comforter in John 14.
The Consolador. The lecture identifies this comforter, the Spirit of Truth, as Jesus himself, the Holy Spirit.
So not a separate person of the Trinity.
No. And it says this Spirit of Truth was sent 1,857 years after Jesus' ascension.
Which directly leads to the critique of the Trinity doctrine itself.
Yeah, calling it a human-made confusion, a significant break from mainstream Christianity, obviously.
Then there's the description of what happened after the crucifixion. No physical resurrection in the typical sense.
The lecture claims the physical body was pulverized, only the shroud left behind.
And specifically not the Shroud of Turin.
Right, dismissed as a fabrication, though no specific reasons are given in the text we have. It's presented as a spiritual transformation, explaining the empty tomb differently.
And Jesus' appearances afterwards, not just to the apostles.
Appearances to Mary Magdalene, sure, but also to this larger group, the 500 of Galilee.
People not often mentioned outside Spiritism, described as simple, vegetarian, from Nazareth area.
And descended from Gaulish families who migrated there 150 BCE. That's very specific historical context.
And Moses supposedly appeared to them too.
Yeah, linking them maybe to older traditions, perhaps Essene groups.
Interesting. And the lecture explains spirit communication back then through mediumship.
Suggests Paul was a medium for Stephen, who was a medium for Christ. It frames those divine interactions in spiritist terms.
There's that story about the general.
Oh yeah, the one who persecuted Christians and thought the 500 were crazy.
But the lecture's explanation is that Jesus only let those with eyes to see, spiritually speaking, perceive him.
Highlights that idea of spiritual perception not being universal.
And these 500 were sent out, along with 70 others to Jerusalem.
Right, and those 70 experienced tongues of fire.
Interpreted here as spirit possession, allowing them to speak other languages.
Yeah, and supposedly led to 3,500 conversions because people heard messages from their ancestors in their own languages, again, reinterpreting Pentecost through a spiritist lens.
Okay, moving on to the early Christian persecution. The lecture says the early movement had no priests, no pope.
And that Jesus emphasized giving freely, contrasting with later hierarchy.
It brings up Judas, too, as treasurer, and this tree of betrayal.
In the Valley of the Potter, bought with the silver. Apparently, those who betray Christ's teachings get spiritually stuck there, metaphorically speaking.
Has a layer of spiritual consequence. Then we jump to St. Barbara.
Around 306 AD in Turkey. Persecuted, killed for her faith. Becomes protector against lightning after her father gets struck.
A classic saint's legend.
Followed by St. Theodore of Amasea.
The dragon slayer.
Which the speaker uses to question sainthood based on, well, killing mythical creatures?
And then Lenar, the dragon source from earlier, explains dragons.
Says they're based on scary flying lizards from an exile planet, Capella, used to frighten kids.
And the fire-breathing part.
A metaphor for the fire of lies. It's a very unconventional, almost sci-fi explanation for the myth.
Definitely raises questions about how legends form. Then Constantine.
Edict of Milan, 313 AD, religious freedom. Then the Council of Nicaea, 325 AD.
Though the lecture mentions 319 somewhere else, maybe a slip. But Nicaea established the Nicene Creed, the Trinity.
And the lecture frames this whole thing politically. Constantine wanting control, collaborating with, 1,800 bishops and priests already there.
So theology mixed with imperial power plays.
Seems to be the argument. And it gets even more elaborate.
The past-lived stuff.
Yeah.
Constantine and his brother-in-law as geneticists on Capella.
Yeah, exiled to Earth, lacking love, reincarnating. It attributes their historical actions to these deep-seated traits.
And Constantine's sister, a powerful medium in Constantinople.
Who supposedly assassinated her husband, the Western Emperor, on Constantine's orders to consolidate power. It's quite the drama.
A very complex backstory added to historical figures. And then it mentions Mussolini giving the Lateran Palace, Vatican City, to the papacy much later.
Just sort of a side note on Vatican history.
But back to the early church, a major claim about Peter.
That he was never a pope. And the papacy only really formed around the 11th century, like 1100 AD.
That's a huge challenge to Catholic tradition. How does it interpret the rock passage? Matthew 16:18.
On this rock I will build my church. The lecture says the rock isn't Peter, it's the principle of communicability of mediumship.
Wow. Okay. A spiritist rereading of a foundational verse for papal authority.
And it wraps up this section saying Constantine's sister died soon after Nicaea, and Jesus told followers to basically lie low, spiritually speaking.
Because a spiritual darkness was falling.
Yeah, a darkness lasting until Spiritism emerged in 1857. It frames centuries of history as a period of suppressed spiritual truth.
Which leads right into the reemergence of Spiritism.
Attributing the suppression during that dark time mainly to the Inquisition, persecuting spirit communicators as witches.
Standard historical conflict between orthodoxy and alternative practices. And then Allan Kardec appears.
Hippolyte Léon Denisard Rivail, his birth name. Influential French family, became the codifier of Spiritism.
The lecture mentions phenomena before him,
yeah.
though, right? Moving furniture in France.
And the Fox sisters in the U.S., the spirit rappings. Even though one sister later recanted, the lecture dismisses that recantation.
So acknowledging precursors, suggesting Kardec systematized something already happening.
And it highlights the positive impact claimed for Kardec's big work, the Spirits book.
Reducing suicide rates by offering explanations and hope about the afterlife.
Yeah, suggesting it provided a framework that helped people cope with loss and unexplained phenomena.
Then it broadens out again, saying spirit communication has always existed since humanity began.
And even in the animal kingdom,
Yeah.
like discarnate monkeys talking to living ones.
Okay, that's unusual. And the claim about dark spirits needing energy from meat eaters.
Definitely a unique idea about diet and spiritual energy, extends the concept way beyond just humans.
And the fate of Spiritism itself, rejected in Europe and the U.S.
But finding a real home in Brazil where it flourished.
And there's that warning again about mediums who charge money.
Links back to the tree of betrayal, negative spiritual consequences if you commercialize the gift. Emphasizes it should be free service.
Then it brings in the popes again, more recently, John Paul I.
Presented as a spirit worker, connected to Bezerra de Menezes trying to introduce Spiritism to Catholic youth.
And during John Paul II's visit to Brazil, an encounter with spirits of deceased priests.
Yeah, seeking answers about the afterlife. The lecture claims even John Paul II's spirit got help understanding Spiritism after he died.
Bringing the narrative right up to modern times, suggesting these connections persist, even if hidden.
And the lecture finishes with a final message, right?
Yeah, referencing Jesus on Scandal, don't be the cause of it. Urging listeners to use free will, seek protection from spirit guides.
A final call to personal responsibility and trust in benevolent spiritual help.
So wrapping up this deep dive, we've covered some incredible ground. This unique narrative connecting Jesus way back, the evolution of beliefs, spirit communication coming and going, these really provocative Bible interpretations.
All through the very specific lens of this spiritual lecture. It definitely leaves you with questions.
For sure. Like for you listening.
Yeah.
What do you make of connecting Atlantis and spiritual evolution? Does this alternative history of Christianity resonate at all with your understanding?
And what about the idea of ongoing spirit communication? What implications could that have for you?
We definitely encourage you to dig deeper if this sparked your interest. Look into early Christian history, Allan Kardec's life, Spiritist principles.
And just consider how much interpretation shapes our understanding of history and spiritual texts.
Absolutely. The journey of knowledge, it's always ongoing, isn't it?
It is. Today's deep dive offered one fascinating, maybe unconventional path to consider as you navigate your own understanding of, well, everything, the world and what might lie beyond.